selected. I didn't even have me added to the screen. One day I'll get my life together and know exactly what's happening whenever I do these live videos. Hello and happy Taco Tuesday. I hope that you're having a fantastic day. If this is your first time joining us or you've been around here for a while, hello and welcome. I'm Crystal Profit. I teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. And today, I specifically wanted to talk about today's podcast episode. So make sure you say hi in the comments if you're just now joining us. Actually, hang on. I'm like clicking all kinds of things in the background. There we go. There. Oh, we can switch it. We can switch it up real fast. We are talking about a limited series podcast. So if you've listened to today's episode of the Profit Podcast, nope, I never get it right. The Profit Podcast, this is what's new today. So we are talking about a limited series podcast. If you've been around here before, then you know I plan my content pretty far in advance. Sometimes it's a quarter at a time, like as in 3 months, and other times it is kind of flying by the seat of my pants. It just depends on like what I have like at scale. Like if I have a whole bunch of ideas that come to me, I will literally go into my content calendar and just do a brain dump of all of the ideas. Or if I get an influx of questions in our Facebook group, then I will just brain dump all of those and say, okay, what are the most important topics that we need to talk about? But the limited series podcast was really top of mind for me at the beginning of the year because I knew one that was starting, and we'll talk about that in a second. I knew a limited series podcast that was starting, but also I started thinking there's a lot of people that I know in our community here, in our podcast community, whether you're watching on YouTube or you're watching on Facebook, or there's just a lot of people that I interact with on a regular basis that could benefit from having a limited series podcast because I get asked all the time, I think I want to start another podcast. Should I? What an open-ended question, right? Like, well, there's a lot of other factors that go into that question. And it's not just, oh yeah, sure, start another podcast. Or it's not oh no, that's absolutely wrong for you. There's many, many nuances that go into my answer of should you have a limited series podcast or not? Or should you have a second podcast or not? So I want to quickly go into, yeah, that was me last week, LOL. Hi, Kathy. So happy that you're here. So I do understand the question, should I have another podcast? Why do I understand this so well? Because I have 2 podcasts. I get it. I get it when people ask this question. But really, it's more so people get curious about other ideas whenever they tap into their creativity, right? Because for a lot of people, let me go full screen here. For a lot of people, when they're podcasting, their biggest obstacle is confidence, right? Like if you are a podcaster, you can like tell me in the comments, like what was really holding you back from getting started in the very beginning. Most people are going to say, I didn't have the confidence to actually just show up and start recording. But then once you gain that confidence, right? You've been doing it for a while. Kathy, I know, launched her podcast in October of 2020. So she's been doing this for a while. She's got that confidence. She's like, what else is out there? Like what other things are going on? Like what other topics am I passionate about? What other things would I love to have a podcast about? And this is when you kind of get into, should I have a separate podcast for this one topic? Should I do this? Should I do that? Like there's a lot of options. So a limited series podcast specifically is very much like a limited series you would find on Netflix. Now, y'all, this is so funny. I started looking at, whenever I was planning this episode, I was like, okay, what's a good comparison? And I didn't really talk about it too much in the podcast, but I mentioned it in the show notes. Um, a comparison of a limited series on Netflix to podcasting. Where can I make a comparison? And y'all, I know y'all are going to hate me for bringing this up, but I have to say the number one like limited series on Netflix that like a lot of people who were talking about was The Queen's Gambit. I haven't watched it. My husband watched it without me. It was a sore subject for a while because I'm like, seriously, you watch this show without me? And he was like, I didn't think you would like it. I didn't think you wanted to watch it. And then I hear everybody talking about it all the time. So I have not seen The Queen's Gambit, but that is an example of a limited series podcast. The other show that I have seen, and I'm like, I cannot get those hours of my life back, is The Tiger King. Okay, so imagine this, right? We are in the height of quarantine. Like it is just beginning last year in 2020. And my brother messages me and was like, he sends me a picture, the Tiger King or whatever. And I'm like, do we know this person? Who is this? And he was like, you gotta go watch it on Netflix. So we go and watch it, and it's total train wreck, dumpster fire, all the things. And then I find out I've had like family members that actually went there, like in the height of like this guy running this, tiger, all the things. It was so crazy. But that is an example of a limited series on Netflix. It is a short period of time. It is basically like a really long movie, but then it's over. It's over. Like, unless they come out with another season of Tiger King, like it's just, it happens, it's done. And it's the same idea of with a podcast. Like you can have one season and not have any more if you don't want to. So that is like, it kind of leaves it open-ended to, you can come back for another season if you want to, or you could just put it out there and that's all it is. That's all it's ever going to be. And like, kind of like just getting it out of you. If you wanted to have like a burst of creativity that you wanted to create something and you're just like, I just had to put it out there. Okay. It's out there. Like I said my piece, I did what I did. And that is what a limited series podcast could be. So in today's episode, I did give you some examples, but I want to say hi to some of y'all. Hey, Phil, so happy that you're here. Hi, Laura. She says, I want to write a book, but I'm thinking like a vlogcast could give the information better. Yeah, that's another good way to look at it. Podcast tips. Yes. That's what we are talking about today. But okay, so let's go back to the examples that I gave on the podcast. There were two, and I'm going to really go deep into one of them because I think it's the one that's the most relevant for everybody that's watching here today. And it is Elizabeth Gilbert created her book, Big Magic. So if you've been around here, you've listened to the podcast, you've heard me talk about Big Magic is one of my favorite books ever. Like I don't typically reread books, but I have listened to this audiobook so many times. It's like whenever I feel stuck creatively, I go back and I listen to Big Magic and like all the things happen. Like I just get re-energized in my journey. And she launched this book in 2015. So it's more than 6 years ago. She launches this book. And then in 2016, she launched a limited series podcast directly related to her book. The reason why I wanted to talk about this one is because I know a lot of people in this community have aspirations to write a book or have a conference or have a live event or have a course or membership. And they've thought, what if I created a resource specifically for this one thing, right? Whatever this thing is, your book, your event, your course, membership, whatever, this one thing. What if I created something and I put it out there, but it wasn't a commitment to showing up every single week? So this is very different than a regular podcast, right? Because with the regular podcast, if you've been around here, you know I am a fan of consistency. You better be showing up every single week, at least one time a week, publishing a brand new podcast episode. And that's my philosophy on being consistent with your podcast content. But with a limited series podcast, I mean, if you wanted to, you could literally throw out all of the episodes at one time and just walk away from it. Because I mean, that's what they do on Netflix, right? Like they put the whole, like all the episodes in one season. They put it all out there, and it's out there. You can binge listen to it. You can listen to it in one sitting. You can binge watch it over the weekend. It was really interesting because I was listening to a podcast called Smartless. If you know who Jason Bateman and Will Arnett and Sean Hayes are, they're actors in Los Angeles. And they invited, I'm going to say his name totally wrong. It's Ted something, but he is the chief content person at Netflix. Okay. This was a really cool insight into how they decided how they were going to launch episodes and shows on Netflix. So he talked about, should we have it to where it's like network television and you only get one episode every week? And he was like, no, like we're going to put it all out there. And no one had ever done that before. Like, why would you just put it all out there? Why don't you just do it one episode every week? Like, why would you give them access to everything all at once? And it's really created this idea of binging content. Yes, Laura says binge worthy. Exactly. Like that's exactly what it's created. And it's really interesting because I feel like this is where content has evolved. I was thinking evolution. This is where content has evolved to. So I wanted to add that extra element. So if you've listened to the podcast, I don't talk about the whole Netflix. Like I don't go deep into that in the episode because I wanted to get very, very clear on what a limited series podcast is, how it can help you, and if it's the right decision for you. And there's some questions in there to ask yourself. And there's a lot of other good resources to kind of point you to examples of what I've listened to so you can actually go listen to these yourself. One of them was getting released in real time this year in 2021. And I listened to the whole thing every single week. And I'm so glad that I did because that episode or that podcast, the limited series podcast, was Amy Porterfield's Talking Body. And it was totally unrelated to what she does on a regular basis. She normally talks about online marketing. And yet on this podcast, she's talking about body image and like just your connection with your body. Like it was totally separate than what she normally talks about. So instead of throwing those episodes on her regular podcast and her audience would have been like, what are you even talking about? Like, what does this even mean? She decided to do a limited series podcast. It was only 12 episodes, but what was interesting is the way that they ended it. They said, okay, at the end of this episode, like this is end of season 1. They didn't say like set an intention of season 2 is coming back on this time or that there will be a season 2 at all. They simply just said, this is the end of season 1. And what I love about this is it really gives you some freedom to figure out, do you want to come back for season 2? You can watch and see the metrics. Like, did this perform well? Is this something that I loved? Did I not like it so much? So I like the idea of a limited series podcast, even if you're brand new. I know at the beginning we talked about someone that's like, I don't know if I should have a second podcast. Should it be a different format? What should that look like? But for someone that's brand new to podcasting and you're just like, I don't know how to approach this. Maybe I can start with the book. Like if y'all, here, I have one right here. If you've read my book, so this is my book, Start a Binge-Worthy Podcast. If I wanted to, I could go and I have the audio version of this book, and I've still thought about it, putting it out on as a podcast, just as a podcast, not for sale on Audible, not anywhere, like just putting it out as a podcast to see what happens, just to see what happens. Because I think so often we are just like kind of caught up in all the ideas of how like things could work and like we're going to be in, New York Times bestseller as an author and this and that. But I think at the end of the day, it's about serving your people and meeting them where they're at. And I know that there are so many podcasters out there that could benefit from a book like this. So that's just me talking, like speculating on something I'm going to do behind the scenes. But I really like the idea of having the ability to really just manipulate the content with the limited series podcast, where you can just put it out. There's no continuous planning. There's no like, I'm going to keep doing this. Like, I got to plan for time off. I've got to do all this. Like, it's out there, and we'll see what happens. So that's all I really have to share with y'all today. This was going to be a short live. I hope that you enjoyed this. Go listen to today's podcast. Here it is. Like, we'll just kind of skim through it real fast. If you go to crystalprofit.com/episode 245, it's always a mouthful, but go check it out. Like, I have links to Magic Lessons. That's Elizabeth Gilbert's podcast that I talked about. It released in 2016. Y'all, she is still, the podcast remains in the top charts in the art category on Apple Podcast. She released this podcast in 2016. The last episode came out, and oh my gosh, so crazy. And then Talking Body, like, you can go check it out, where like how this podcast has performed. I linked to Chartable, so you could go see the information on Chartable and what is there. What else did I have? Oh, and then there are questions to consider whether you should have a limited series podcast or not. So, yeah. Hi, I don't know who this is. I always love the exclamation points. We'll catch the replay and podcast episode. Thanks. Yes. Kurt, so happy that you're here. As always, great content. Thank you. I appreciate that so much. I want to know what other questions y'all have about content, because I am always looking for new ideas. Speaking of planning content, I'm always looking for new ideas and new resources and things that podcasters are trying. So if y'all have any questions, drop them in the comments below. Like, leave them if you're watching the replay. Drop them below, because I am planning out the rest of my content for May and June, and I'd love to know what questions you have. So this is your opportunity. If you want to get a shout out on the podcast, I will say, hey, this person, that from YouTube or from the Facebook group had this question. It was fantastic. I always let y'all know your questions are fantastic, because they are. There are no dumb questions. That is for sure. Oh, Sydney. Hi, Sydney. So happy that you're here. This limited series podcast is a brilliant idea. Thank you. I'm so glad that you found it helpful. Yeah, listen to the podcast. Go get some ideas. It's not a long episode. I think this one was under 30 minutes. So yeah, y'all have a fantastic Taco Tuesday. I hope that y'all have a great day. If you do have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Send me a DM. Reach out in the Facebook group. If you haven't joined us in the Facebook group, here, let me add that up here. So our Facebook group, hang on, I always have issues typing this. So crystalprofit.com. I always worry about misspelling everything, because I do. I always misspell everything. So crystalprofit.com/podcast community will route you to our Facebook group that you can join. If you are not a part of our group, come join us. Come hang out. We have great conversations every day all about podcasting. But y'all have a fantastic Taco Tuesday, and I'll talk to you later. Bye, guys.